There is a question underneath every other. Question about death. Not what happens at the moment of dying. Not what the body does when it stops. What happens after. To the part of you that thinks, feels, remembers, and carries the specific weight of being exactly who you are. Where does that go? Most people inherit an answer before they are old enough to evaluate it. They carry it forward from their family, their culture, their fear, without ever sitting with the question directly. Because sitting with it means accepting the possibility that the answer might be different from what they were told. But some people cannot stop asking. Some people feel the question like a pressure. Not morbid, not despairing, but insistent. A pull towards something the mind knows is important even when it cannot say why. If you are one of those people, you are exactly where you need to be right now. Because this video is going to go somewhere. Most content about death refuses to go. We are not going to talk about dying. We are going to talk about what happens between lives. The territory that ancient traditions mapped in extraordinary detail, 1200 years before modern science existed, and that modern near-death research has begun to document with a precision nobody expected. The Tibetan tradition calls it the Bardo. The Vedic tradition calls it the interbhava. Western researchers call it the interlife. But across all the different names, across thousands of years and dozens of traditions that developed entirely independently of each other, the accounts converge on something remarkable. There is a structure to what happens between lives. It is not chaos. It is not nothingness. It is not a waiting room. It is, by every account, the most significant experience a soul undergoes. More significant in many ways than the life itself. Stay with this, because what we uncover in the next 40 minutes will change how you understand not just death, but the life you are living right now. Every recurring struggle, every inexplicable connection, every wound that has no origin you can trace. It all makes different sense from the other side of what we are about to explore. The Tibetan word Bardo literally means in-between state, and the tradition that gave us this word did not arrive at its map of the afterlife through speculation. It arrived through centuries of systematic inner exploration, practitioners who trained their entire lives to remain conscious through the dying process, to navigate the between-life territory with full awareness, and to return with detailed accounts of what they had encountered. The result was a text called the Bardo. Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a document at least 1200 years old, possibly much older, that was not designed as theology or comfort, was designed as a practical guide, a map for a specific territory. And what the map describes, in its original form before it was softened for Western audiences, is not peaceful. It is precise. And the precision, once you understand it, illuminates something about your current life that nothing else quite explains. The Tibetan map divides the between-life experience into distinct phases. Understanding each one changes how you see everything, including the life you are living right now. The first phase begins at the moment the body stops. The Tibetan tradition describes what happens in those first moments as an encounter with something they call the clear light. Not an external light, something intrinsic, the fundamental nature of the mind itself, suddenly visible when the obscuring layers of physical existence fall away. Most souls, according to the text, do not recognize it. The habitual patterns of a lifetime, the attachments, the identifications, the grooves worn deep by decades of choosing the same responses, prevent the recognition. The soul moves past the clear light without understanding what it was looking at. But souls that had practiced, that had spent time in deliberate self-inquiry, in the loosening of ego identification, could recognize the clear light for what it was. And in this framework, recognition is liberation. This is why Tibetan Buddhism placed such profound emphasis on practice during life, not for moral points, not for social respectability, but as preparation for this specific moment. Now, setting aside the Tibetan framework for a moment, this same encounter appears across traditions that had no contact with Tibetan Buddhism. The Vedic tradition describes something remarkably parallel. Sufi mysticism describes the unveiling of the divine light the ego had been obscuring. Certain strands of Christian mysticism describe what sounds strikingly Similar, a moment of absolute clarity, of seeing one's life and soul in full. Different languages, the same encounter. Following this initial phase, the soul moves into what every tradition describes as some form of life review. And this is where modern research becomes genuinely arresting. Dr. Raymond Moody spent decades collecting accounts from people who had died and been resuscitated, people who had no heartbeat, no measurable brain activity, no physiological basis for any experience whatsoever, and yet returned with coherent, detailed, verifiable accounts of what happened while they were clinically dead. The consistency across thousands of cases was not what he expected. People from different countries, different religions, different decades, different cultural contexts, describing the same structure. A panoramic review of the life just lived, not sequential, simultaneous, every moment present at once, and experienced not only from their own perspective, but from the perspective of every person they had affected. Every unkind word felt from inside the person who received it. Every genuine act of compassion felt from inside the person it reached. Not judgment, not punishment, understanding. One woman described experiencing something she had completely forgotten, a casual cruelty toward a childhood friend. She had not known it mattered. In the review, she felt what it had actually done to that child from the inside. She wept, not from shame, from understanding. She finally comprehended what her choice had meant, and the understanding itself was the resolution. This is what karma looks like from the other side of death. Not a ledger being tallied, not a score being settled. With punishment, a comprehension being deepened. The soul finally seeing the full picture of what its choices actually meant, with no ego left to defend against. The saying. After the review, after the comprehension, comes the part that changes everything about how you understand your current life. The choice. Every tradition that has mapped the interlife in detail, Tibetan, Vedic, Sufi, and increasingly the testimony of people who have accessed their between life states through deep regression, describes a stage in which the soul does not simply receive its next life as an assignment. It participates in choosing it, not with unlimited freedom, not as a shopping trip through infinite options, but with a form of understanding that vastly exceeds the awareness available to the incarnated self, and with guidance, presences described across all traditions as teachers, as elders, as beings of extraordinary wisdom who assist the soul in reviewing what it has learned, what remains unlearned, and what configuration of circumstances would best serve the soul's continued evolution. Dr. Michael Newton spent 30 years working with deeply hypnotized subjects who accessed their between-life states. His research produced one of the most extraordinary bodies of evidence in this field. Subjects who had no contact with each other, who came from different countries and different spiritual backgrounds, consistently described the same structure. A resting period following the intensity of death and review. Reunions with souls who had traveled previous lives alongside them. Meetings with what Newton's subjects consistently called their council, a group of advanced beings who held the soul's full karmic history and assisted in planning the next incarnation. And then, a planning process in which the major parameters of the next life were not randomly assigned, but deliberately chosen. The family of origin, selected for the specific karmic lessons it would provide. The major challenges, chosen precisely because they corresponded to what the soul most needed to learn. The significant relationships, arranged in broad outline in advance. Souls agreeing to meet again, to continue unfinished work together, sometimes in drastically different roles. The person who was your enemy in one life agreeing to be your closest friend in the next. The dynamic that caused so much suffering, examined in the clarity of the interlife, understood at its karmic root, and then consciously chosen again, this time with the understanding to finally resolve it. Consider what this means for your current life, the family you were born into, not random, the struggles that have followed you, not cosmic indifference, the exact conditions your soul, reviewing its accumulated karmic history in the clarity of the interlife, determine were necessary. For most people who genuinely allow this in, it does not land as burden. It lands as a strange, unexpected relief. The feeling of a very long question, finally beginning to find its answer. You were not handed this life arbitrarily. You came here with intention. You came here knowing, at some level, what you were walking into, and the struggles that have felt most inexplicable, most like the universe singled you out for difficulty. Those may be precisely the ones you chose most deliberately, because you knew from the vantage point of the interlife what they would teach you, and you knew you were ready to learn it. Let's bring this out of the abstract. In 1993, a boy named James Leininger was born in Louisiana to an ordinary American family. His father was a businessman. His mother was a practicing Christian. They had no belief in reincarnation, no spiritual framework that would have planted these ideas. James was 2 years old when the nightmare started. Every night, screaming, thrashing, describing an airplane on fire, a little man who could not get out. Then the statements began. At barely 2 years old, James told his parents the airplane was a Corsair. He said it had gotten a flat tire on an aircraft carrier. He named the ship the Natoma Bay. He named a fellow pilot, Jack Larson. His parents researched. Military records confirmed a pilot named James Houston Jr. had died, precisely as the boy described. Shot down near Iwo Jima, his plane catching fire and going into the sea. The Natoma Bay was real. Jack Larson was real, still alive at the time, and confirmed details of the mission that matched the child's account with a precision that left the father, who had spent years trying to find the rational explanation, finally out of rational explanations. Dr. Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia has now documented over 3,000 cases like James's, 3,000 children, for decades, of peer-reviewed investigation, children with verifiable past life memories, details that could not have been known by the child or their family through any normal means. James's nightmares stopped as he grew older. The memories faded, as though having them witnessed and understood was itself part of the resolution. The soul completed something it had been carrying. Now Dr. Brian Weiss, a skeptical psychiatrist who stumbled into past life regression with a patient named Catherine, describes case after case in which the most persistent, treatment-resistant issues dissolved when the past life origin was accessed and understood, not because past life memories are magic, because understanding is. The pattern cannot maintain its grip once it has been fully seen, not intellectually seen, felt, in the body with the full weight of recognition. This is what the Between Life Review facilitates on a massive scale. The panoramic scene gives the soul the understanding that moment-to-moment incarnated life rarely affords. You see what your choices actually meant. You feel their full impact, and that seeing changes what you choose when you return. You arrive in the new body at some level the conscious mind cannot access, but the soul carries with a different relationship to the pattern, a readiness to see it that was not there before. This is why certain lives feel arranged for maximum growth rather than maximum comfort, because they were. This is why the teacher appeared exactly when you needed them, why the loss broke you open in the specific way it happened, why the person who knows exactly how to reach you and exactly how to wound you keeps showing up. The interlife planning does not guarantee comfort. It guarantees precision. Your soul does not make careless arrangements. So where does this leave you? Right now, in this body, with whatever you carried into this video. 3 things the Between Life research consistently shows, things that change how you move through the life you are currently living. The first, you have never been alone. Every tradition that maps the interlife describes the same thing. The soul does not navigate this territory in isolation. There are presences, teachers, guides, other souls who have traveled alongside you across multiple lifetimes and who continue to accompany you in ways the waking mind cannot perceive. The people in your life who have felt less like new acquaintances and more like old companions, this may be precisely what they are. Souls who agreed before this life began to make this journey alongside you, not accidentally, by choice. The second, every difficulty has been calibrated, not by an external force dispensing fortune and misfortune from a distance. By you, the fullest, wisest version of you, operating from the clarity of the interlife, who understood what this soul needed to learn and arranged the conditions accordingly. This does not mean your suffering is deserved. It means your suffering is purposeful. Deserved suffering is punishment. Purposeful suffering is curriculum. Curriculum has an end, an outcome, a thing it is trying to produce. You are not being punished. You are being educated. And the education is specifically designed for what your soul most needs in this particular chapter of a very long story. The third, and this one matters most, the review that happens between lives is not reserved for after you die. You can begin it now. Not in the full panoramic form that the near-death accounts describe, but a version of it. A deliberate, honest practice of looking at your patterns, your choices, your recurring themes, not to judge yourself, but to understand, to feel the full weight of what your choices have meant, to bring into consciousness what has been running unconsciously. Tonight, before you sleep, try this. Sit somewhere quiet. Bring to mind one recurring pattern in your life, the one that has followed you through multiple relationships, multiple contexts, multiple attempts at change. Do not fight it. Do not analyze it. Just look at it directly and ask, quietly, without demand, what are you here to teach me that I have not yet allowed myself to learn? Sit with that. The answer that comes first will probably be about someone else. Let it pass. Wait for the one that is about you. That answer is what your soul is here to complete in this life. And completion is possible. Every tradition that has mapped this territory agrees on this. The cycles, then, the lessons integrate, the grooves fill, and eventually the soul arrives at what the Vedic tradition calls moksha, liberation, the end of the cycle, the recognition of what the soul always was underneath every life it ever lived. You are somewhere in that arc. This life is one chapter. The struggle you are carrying is not a permanent sentence. It is a current assignment. Your soul chose this life, chose these conditions, these people, these challenges, from a place of greater wisdom than you currently have access to. Trust what it chose. Do the work it came to do. If this video opened something in you, something here felt less like new information and more like recognition, then the next video in this series is waiting for you. We go deeper into exactly why the people in your life are never strangers and what soul contracts look like from the inside. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Not because this channel needs the number, but because the conversation we are building here, video by video, goes somewhere most channels are afraid to go. And you have already shown you are not afraid to go there. See you in the next one.